But just to go back to one of those highlights on the last slide, transparency is big, and because of the amount of intra-budget transfers and furniture out of the house and furniture back in the house and all of those things, it was really important to do everything we could to keep tracking and traceability on expenses as they moved, for the sake of giving everybody a clear understanding of how the zero-sum budget reformed in this year's spending.
Matt, you're a little hard to hear back there.
I'm gonna move over this way. Chip, we good?
I guess I wasn't the only deaf one, right?
So everybody at this point should remember our stack. Here it is one more time in summary for the sake of freshening you up. This was how we reimagined our cost centers this year to focus on strategic equity. Our cost centers are our traditional sections of investment over the budget, everything from district administration to tuition expenses to student services, etc. This year we grouped them together, not just by the cost center that things were in, but by the type of expense. And the first category is Block 1. These are our operational expenses, sort of the foundational element of running the district. The cost centers that nest under Block 1 are the district administration, facilities, technology, food service, transportation, and debt. In Block 2, we have our tuition expenses that we pay out to the Hamerford Career Center and universal pre-K providers. In Block 3, we have the personnel requirements. This is the salary and benefit of required personnel that are required by either federal, state, or board policy. So the people that we have to employ. In Block 4, the matching non-personnel items, so the supplies, services, materials that are in the direct instruction and PD and curriculum cost centers. In Block 5, all of the student services, so these are the expenses that are mandated by IEP and 504 plans for students with disabilities. In Block 6, student opportunity funds, as you've heard about. These are the now visible funds that are created across different bands of students, whether that's age or grade level or what have you, to provide opportunities that augment the educational experience. And then we have equity investments, our new Block 7, which is the sort of cycle of data-driven investments towards executing the strategic. You can see also on the left here that we're kind of going from 0 all the way up to about 51.6 million. So that's a teaser for where we're going to finish here. For the sake of this presentation, we are not going to rehash 1, 2, and 4 blocks because there has not been any major change in those sections from the last several presentations. This summary serves as a reminder of where these are at and is there for reference. You will see throughout the presentation that we did continue our price tagging exercise, usually on the right column and in purple. The price tags are all based on our LTW ADM number, which is in its 3rd version right now. We're expecting maybe one more small edit, but we're feeling pretty confident at where our equalized people count is at today. The previous presentation that used price tags as a tool for understanding big numbers by making them into small numbers used the ACSD pupil count, and so there's not comparability between that presentation's price tag and this one, just in case anyone's trying to say, oh, the price tags used to be way higher. Well, we added a lot more pupils by doing it this way. You will see at the end how all of those stack up. We're going to spend some time in Block 3, Block 5, Block 6, and Block 7 first. And I apologize because this is gonna be a little bit small, some of these slides, so if you don't have them in front of you, you might wanna pull up a device if you have it, but, we did our best to fit a lot of information on them. Summary of Block 3 expenses, again, these are required personnel. Coming from two cost centers, direct instruction, PD, and curriculum. What you're seeing here is reduction in direct instruction of 15% and an increase in PD and curriculum of 126%, which is a ridiculous number. But it's true, because goes to the tracing of expenses. PD and curriculum is largely augmented by the title grants. A lot of those investments were in previous budgets shown as canceling out revenue and expense. You know, we're going to spend this much on title grants, we're going to receive this much on revenue, and those positions never got included in the cost center, even though those positions served the cost center. And so by taking everything out, whether it was in the main house or the guest house or whatever, and putting it out, we sort of illuminate them for the first time as a part of the PD and curriculum. There are also changes within the budget, so the director of PD and curriculum is now in the PD and curriculum department, and there are those new coordinator positions that Dr. Baker referenced earlier as well. Direct instruction, we have to remember at this juncture, also holds Block 6 and Block 7, and a lot of those personnel, because they are no longer part of Block 3, cause that 15% reduction in Block 3. It doesn't mean that we have gutted direct instruction, it just means that those investments are represented in a different block. Okay. This is a chart that shows our small elementary schools, Block 3. The next chart will show Meridian, a sum of the small schools and middle school and high school. What we're showing here is an FTE comparison across all positions at those elementary schools for all of our core positions held in Block 3. As we get down to the lower blue sections, we're looking at the outgoing class, the incoming class, and the new projected enrollment for FY26, how many classrooms that's going to lead to, and then a class size that would be a byproduct of that many classrooms. The two white lines below that show some ratios, so that instructional staff to student ratio is a metric that the state uses to determine comparability, and also the federal government. It's teachers, principals, and half general ed paras for some reason. And then for total core staff, we took all the adults who were represented, all the all the FTEs on this slide, and compared that to the enrollment. And so as you're going across, you can compare some of those ratios in both of those metrics. AMS, just as a reminder, is art, movement, and Spanish, art, music.
Arts, movement, and Spanish.
I got it right.
Arts.
I always think, where's music? It's in there. And you can see there that we've got really good comparability in AMS across the board. One of the things that's happening in Block 3 is it's an enrollment-based block. It's really about rules. What are the staffing rules that create equalization? And by creating equalization in Block 3, we build a level floor that then allows inequity to emerge and then be addressed in other blocks, if that makes sense. So I think one of the comments, might have referenced concern over class size as a way of not addressing equity, and I think that if you, the logic behind equalization of class sizes is that it allows other resources to be overlaid on top of this in order to do just that. So These little gray lines, I should have popped them up earlier, but they are there to show the number of classroom teachers this year. So you can see a reduction of 1 at Bridport, 1 at Cornwall, 1 at Ripton, 2 at Shoreham. Going to the next slide. You can see a reduction of 1 classroom teacher at Mary Hogan, reduction of 4.5 general ed paras. And all of these positions were summarized by Dr. Baker in her introduction, but this is just another visual of where they land. When you get to the small school combined column, you get to, for the first time, look at sort of one of the major differences between our small rural schools and Mary Hogan. Traditionally, the small rural schools, or historically I should say, generally sum to about the same enrollment or similar enrollment as Mary Hogan. You can see 347, 341 in FY25, 333, 325 in FY26 projected. The same number of classrooms projected. And then there are some things that aren't the same. There's obviously, by virtue of running small schools, the need for more general ed paras here on a school-to-school basis, more administrative assistants because we have to staff each school, greater FTE of librarians, et cetera, et cetera. Administrators would be the other one. At MUMS, you can see the MUMS Mary Hogan in the high school, you can see the increase there of student response, FTE. Classroom teacher at the high school is, I feel like that should, actually I've got it on this slide here. So we're gonna look at those reductions and creations in a
Larger font?
larger font. What we're adding on this slide are some asterisks as well, because it was really important for the sake of traceability to show on the right hand side created column things that are not bold but have asterisks. We're tracking where it came from. So a single asterisk in this case is showing a position that was really funded by a reduction in Block 5, 2 asterisks if it was funded by a reduction in Block 3. Things that don't have an asterisk are bolded because those really represent new investments that don't directly translate from another source. And so in this case, in Block 3, that's the curriculum coordinators and the 2 health educators. The student services, you have to understand the story here of what happened between adopting the FY25 budget and looking at the FY26 draft, and that was the actual or adjusted performance within that cost center. A lot of things happened in between then and now to get us where we are. And if we don't track those and keep sort of a good handle on them, it looks like student services, which is one of the things that we were trying to streamline, went up 30% from where we were in FY25, and that's not necessarily what happened. As you can see in that middle column, the FY25 adjusted, we started with a base of about $7.8 million in student services. And then we had, by virtue of the creation of a new ACP program at 208 and the dissolution of the consortium, which was funding 2/3 of the existing high school and middle school programs, a lot of new expense land at our doorstep with regards to those programs. That wasn't part of the plan. in response to emerging student need in FY '25, we transferred 10.0 paraeducators from their direct instruction classroom para positions into a high needs position. And that investment was new money into the FY '25 student services budget. Similarly, interventionists who were doing work in special education needed to be shown now as parts of the student services budget. And that's that interventionist line. 4 of those, as we're gonna see, are the ESSER funded positions, which moved over from 24 to 25. And then the other 3.0 are the ones that were identified by time studies as the sum of the portion of all of our interventionist time that's actually being spent on those plans. Next, we have our Aspire coordinator, which Aspire and 504 coordinators. These positions were not housed in the student services budget, but are there now. And then the assistant superintendent of student services and equity was not in student services, and it's shown as a reduction in this cost center, or this block, so we needed to show it as an expense, because you can't reduce something that wasn't there in the first place. So, if we take all of those and add them up, we get, in addition to our IDEA-B grant expenses, $11.1 million of total student services expense. Now we have something that we can compare to when we're looking at where we're planning to go this year. And so within the general fund cost center, we're seeing at $10.1 million, which does represent a 3% reduction from where we were brought to this year. IDEA-B is a federal grant, which means that it's always going to cancel out, so we're going to get money in as revenue, and we're going to spend as much of it as we possibly can in expense, and so there's no variance there. What we get is what we spend. Summing those two, we see a net year-to-year projection of minus 3% in the student services cost center. I know that was a lot. That's probably the most confusing as far as which room we put the stuff back into and where it came from in the first place and all that stuff. Everybody with me? Okay.
We've heard this 3 times, so it's,
can do it again.
it is really complicated, okay?
First time I got it.
But it's also, the more you hear it, it makes sense.
This chart summarizes all of the positions in Block 5. By request, we did do a lot of detail on the positions in 3, and felt like it was important to have a similar slide that kind of charted Block 5 in its entirety. The format of this, if you're looking at the left column, might look like it's missing things or that it doesn't have a lot of detail to it, but it's intentional because this is how the state asks us to report our special education budget on the special education report, SEER report that we have to submit to them every year. And so it's important to understand how the positions that we have in student services fit into these boxes, because that's what the state likes to see, and that's how we planned it. In bold on the right are the positions where there's a change, either an addition or subtraction between 25 and 26. You can see there a net reduction of personnel in the cost center from 128 to 134 roughly. And here's another summary. The only position that was created is the Director of Specialized Services. That one was funded by a Block 5 reduction. What was that Block 5 reduction? Well, if you're still paying attention, the Block 5 reduction that led to the Director of Specialized Services was the Assistant Superintendent of, 2 Directors of Special Education. There we go. So here's, again, the list which sums all of those reductions, including the ones that needed to be transferred in. And then all the things that will be new in the cost center this year. So when it says transferred in, that means they are still part of the cost center, but they weren't here last year. That's that 10 high needs paras, the 2 ACP administrators, the ACP personnel from Consortium and 208, and then 3.0.
Quick question,
Yeah.
is it okay? Other professional staff and other non-professional staff, can you clarify what that
Yeah,
is?
that's, other professional staff are CSEC counselors. That's where we record the contracted services with CSEC. Non-professional other staff are CSEC, I'm blanking on the acronym.
BIs,
It's similar to a BI, but it has a
is it licensed versus unlicensed? Is that
It's
the way we would
unlicensed, yeah,
translate that
exactly,
normally
yeah.
in, that are provided to us through a third-party vendor? Okay.
Okay. Now we're changing from things that tie to specific cost centers to things that really are about the investments. Everything that we're talking about is going to be in the direct instruction cost center. In student opportunities, it's important to remember as kind of a general rule that it's an opportunity if it's not tied to close credit. Just one way of thinking about it. And so here's what we have. The requirement in block 3 for elementary music is general music. We provide general music in a fixed amount to each elementary school. We also provide supplemental music, and that can be band or chorus or both, and historically have had an unequalized or uneven distribution of those supplemental programs. And I think part of this plan in block 6 is to help even those out and ensure that there's access to supplemental music across all elementary schools. The next 2, 3 are all of the athletics and co-curriculars, including the travel for secondary level. This includes things like equipment, coach stipends, activities directors, salary and benefits, and all of the department budgets or club budgets for our co-curriculars and teams. The next line is field trips. This is an investment that we've had sort of in the spending plan for the last 2 or 3 years now. It is sort of the first visible student opportunity that applies to all elementary school students, and it was put in here as a fixed $25 per pupil allocation. That has been fixed from year to year, even though elementary enrollment's down slightly, and the reasoning behind that is just that field trips may have gotten a little bit more expensive based on the rate of inflation, and so that turns out to be kind of a wash. But generally, $25 per elementary school student goes to field trips. We heard earlier about KEEK for 5th graders. That's a $35,000 investment here in the FY26 spending plan. And then the last one that we included in block 6 is IB fees. IB fees. And those are here, and only those are here because IB is an opportunity, and the district does not need to use IB as its coordinated curriculum. In the absence of using IB as the coordinated curriculum, we would still need curriculum coordinators, and that's why the curriculum coordinators are not student opportunities, but the opportunity to have access to IB as the curriculum is the opportunity, and that's why that's broken out here in the last line.
So for clarity, Matt, that is the entire IB fee that we pay?
Yeah.
So it's only $85,000.
65.
65.
But 65,000.
Yeah.
And that includes fees for DP exams that we pay on behalf of students. You
Yeah.
know, you probably at one time, if you offered an AP course, there were AP exams. I don't know whether the school district would have paid for them or not, but we pay for all of those. It also includes opportunities that I hope we can take greater advantage of in this next year, because we are part of a global community of schools, all of whom have the same curricular units in place. So one of the things that IB offers is the opportunity to have sister schools, or brother schools in different parts of the country and the world. So as we have, this director of equity, inclusion, and restorative practice that's working with our director of teaching and learning, our hope is that we can actually provide opportunities for kids to connect with far more diverse communities than they can here. And those fees also represent the chance for us to do that en masse. And that's an opportunity that I would look forward to having us do more readily.
There was also that we benefited from a consolidation of the fees for the individual elementary schools.
Yeah, that was a win.
Which means that no matter how many elementary schools we have, that's probably about where our fees will be. So because they've already given us kind of a grace of thinking of all of our elementary schools as one bucket, as opposed to lots of them, which had previously changed our fee structure, so this feels like a sustainable piece going forward.
We've made it to the top of the stack, block 7. And here we have another summary of the equity investments that you all have been introduced to. 10.0 instructional specialists, 2.2 team members for the high school flexible pathways team, the balance of interventionists that were included in block 5, which is 7. And then an allocation of $100,000 for PD and data services. This is sort of the, if you remember the triangle plan, how there's some providers, coaches, and system supports. This is really the idea that in order to have a performance-based equity budgeting component to our plan, we need to shore up the investment with the PD and data services to make them work and create that performance cycle to say, hey, this is a good investment, this is a bad investment, or we don't know, let's do it again for another year. And so there's money there for that. And then the last equity piece is a summer and after school fund with the first installment of that in FY26 being for Bridport and Shoreham. I believe that this is also a hedge against a grant that we're hoping to get and fund that opportunity one way or the other.
Well, yeah, whatever grants we can get, we'll take, in that sense. I could say that, I'll ask the principals to tell me if I don't get this right, but instructional specialists as right now are allocated, in that 3.5 are at MUMS, 2 are at Mary Hogan, 1 is at Bridport, 1 is at Shoreham, 1 is at Salisbury, and 1 is at Cornwall. Most of them are math focused. This district, I think we've spoken about as maybe underinvested a bit over time in terms of math. And so the majority of the data work that principals and their staff teams did related to the need to really pick up our math instruction. And so there are some literacy specialists in that mix, but the vast majority of that work will be done in math. And as I say, that's an intensive strategy designed for the time we're in, and so we certainly can talk more about that as we go. Did I miss any or misallocate any instruction? Okay. The academic interventionists, that's part of, we have sort of tentative allocations, and that what we think will be needed in order to support students with that second boost. We'll finalize those in the spring, once we know where all the kids are, but they had those tentative allocations.
Can I ask a question about the instructional specialists?
Yep.
If enrollment changes in schools requiring the retention of classroom teachers, where now we're seeing an anticipated reduction, will we then be hiring new personnel to fill in the instructional specialist position that reassigned classroom teacher might have otherwise filled?
So, it was way too early to be talking about where we would be hiring in that sense. However, if there are classroom teachers that thought they might be leaving their classroom because it's a classroom that's not there and has decided to do another opportunity, or that's come out of our instructional staff in some way, and we need instructional staff back because we've got an influx of enrollment in either Cornwall or Ripton or the other schools where that's coming from, then we would reassess and post the appropriate positions once our staff have determined where they'd like their focus to be next year.
I asked just because I think based on the projected enrollment numbers that we've most recently looked at, there are a few places where there are class sizes of maybe 8 or 7. So a shift up by just a few kids could mean that we triggered D6 class size and conflicts if you were to merge too big, et cetera. So it seems like a real possibility that
And financially, for financial strategy, we've made sure to add staff here that is a placeholder, so that we, like we've got an extra para in Cornwall, so that, that's roughly half the cost of a teacher, so that if we need to draw from contingency funds to make that shift, because we got a whole bunch of kindergartners coming in Cornwall, then that we're prepared to be able to do that in this budget. Same thing in Ripton,
or Salisbury. It looks like Salisbury could be similar, but yes.
Yeah, Salisbury doesn't have a loss of a teacher, so that's okay, but in those two places particularly, we'll have to kind of see where things are based on how your conversations go. So we believe we've built enough of a financial strategy into this budget to be able to take care of that, need be.
So, just one more time summarizing all of the Block 7 positions. And on to the summary. So now we're going to look at all the blocks stacked up to our total expense. And then we're going to also pull those price tags back in together to show how those all look in comparison. So here you can see each of the 7 blocks with the proposed budget, summing to the total of $50,318,926.
Thank you.
Corresponding price tags on the right, summing to $18,385 per LTW-ADM. Just as a reminder, that's the metric there. Now, remember that price tag, because that, as we were talking about earlier, includes every single dollar in the district's expense budget, including anything that comes from a federal grant, a state grant, or other. That is not the same as the per pupil spending amount that we're going to determine based on our ed spending, which we're going to look at next.
It is, however, one of the things I think that's important is that it is in the same language, which will allow us to be able to share information with legislatures as this legislative session opens and continues, as we expect them to contend with the idea of a foundation formula. What should that look like? What should that mean? We're able to translate exactly where all of our dollars go per long-term weighted average daily membership in the weighting structure they created, so that we're able to have those conversations in an apples-to-apples way. So if we were fully funded by a foundational formula at, from the state, we would receive $18,385 per long-term weighted average daily
Membership.
person, right, member. That's what I was trying to translate. The difference between the two, as Matt's gonna say, is our grant amount. amount. You know, those are our federal grants and whatnot that come into play, so that's why the difference is there. Go ahead, Matt.
So, yeah, we can, again, just see about a $4,000 difference there per LTWADM. And we're transitioning now into taxes. In order to do that, we have to start with our total expense. We've backed out the fund balance, because fund balance is never the same year to year. And it's not included in the education spending, so for the sake of comparability and calculating ed spending, we're just not including fund balance as an expense or revenue in this at this time. To get to ed spending, which is the amount to be raised by taxes, you start with our total expense, and then we back out all of the offsetting revenue. That's all of our federal grants, our census block grant, other state grants such as the transportation assistance grant, the school consolidation merger grant, the English language learner grant, tuition revenue that we receive from other districts who pay to have their students attend ours, etc. And all of that sums to $10.9 million. That yields an ed spending of $39.3 million. And for comparison, we were at $40.04 million in FY25, with a difference of about $711,000. That means that even though our top line total expense went up 2%, which is exactly what $50.3 million is, our ed spending went down 1.78%. And that's largely because of the increase in revenue, and the largest part of that increase was from the census block grant, which we're in the last year of that equalizing to a uniform base amount for FY27. So we have one more year where we received an extra $390,000 in revenue for special education. That pushes us from a growth budget of 2% to 1.78 reduction in ed spending.
Which is what we are asking the state to contribute to our education as a whole, drawing down from that pot, that ed fund pot.
So now we're into taxes. And
There are only 3 slides, right?
first we have to calculate our per pupil spending. And to do that, we bring in our LTWADM, which again is not frozen or finalized yet, but we're projecting it to be pretty close to this. No real variance expected. That yields our per pupil education spending when we divide our ed spending by the pupils of 14,370. For the sake of comparison, that's down close to 11% from last year, or from this year. Now, hearkening back to when we were breaking down the LTWADM, you might remember that we went up about 10% in that number, largely due to an increase in direct certification numbers, bumping up our students living in poverty. So that data bump gave us kind of an unprecedented 10% increase in LTWADM. That's not going to happen again, but it happened this year, and because we got more weight applied for this budget, we're seeing the benefit in bringing our per pupil ed spending down about 10% or 10.7%. For reference, the excess spending threshold this year is 15.9. That's calculated as the average of the state's per pupil spending times, I think it's 118%. So if you're over 18% of the average after it's adjusted for yearly inflation, you pass the threshold. Now that we have that done, we need to calculate our district tax rate. And this year, you might remember, that's called the adjusted equalized district tax rate. We start with the homestead property yield, which is still in its first version and will need to settle into a final version before it's made law, but for now it's adjusted to $8,553. Dividing our per pupil education spending by the adjusted property yields gives us an adjusted equalized district tax rate of $1.68. We also have to adjust our discount, and because we get a discount this year of 10 cents and then divide it by 0.72, which is the approximate state adjustment factor, our 13-cent discount this year becomes a 13.8-cent discount next year. You might remember that weird math from the tax presentation 2 weeks ago. We then apply that discount to get to $1.54, which is our discounted, adjusted, and equalized district tax rate, and the number that would go on the ballot. For the sake of comparison, everything in italics below gives us an idea of how that stacks up to where we are this year. We've taken the adjustment factor off the yields to show that it would be about $11,879 if we were to not have adjusted it. Our discount would have been, sorry, that should say 10 cents, that's a typo, but we'll keep rolling with it. Our unadjusted equalized district tax rate then would be $1.24. And let's see. Yeah. And so, yeah, I just have to add 3 cents to that one. $1.11. Anyways, the comparison is that, you know, we've gone down about 28% year to year, and that might actually look a little bit more like 25% with the typo removed from that. Caught it.
But just to,
Yeah.
so just from a messaging standpoint, the adjusted EDTR, the discounted adjusted EDTR, that is, we're looking at for fiscal year 26.
Yep.
Is gonna constitute a 28% reduction from last year's.
Yeah. Even though on paper it looks like a 4-cent increase.
Let's leave that part out.
Because it's adjusted. And we get to use the same adjustment to manipulate the CLAs for each town, based on where they are relative to the state's average.
Got it, okay.
And that gives us some high CLAs, which you're gonna see here, in that projected adjusted CLA column. Report with the highest of 149%. That is not Bridport's CLA from their equalization study. That is their equalization, or CLA adjusted by that state average to show where they are in proportion to the average property values across the state. Just like we adjusted everything else, we adjust the CLAs. Those two adjustments then cancel each other out. So what we're left with is an actual tax rate, free of any adjustments. We can see there the $1.54 plugged in as our district's generated tax rate coming from the school budget. When we apply the adjusted CLA to the adjusted tax rate, we get the projected town tax rate, and you can see them there for each town, ranging from $1.03 all the way up to $1.91. For comparison, you can see the FY25 tax rate for each of those towns, and then what the difference is in both amount and percent. And some substantial changes, ranging from 51% to a 10% reduction in property tax rate generated by the school district. I will just say that note on the bottom shows that the projected adjusted CLA has been finalized by the equalization study, which came out on the 26th, and so we can confirm that that column will be as is for the rest of this cycle.